Jacques Chirac is president of France. He was elected in 1995 on his third try. He'd previously been prime minister of that country. He's had a long career in French politics. He is in Washington today talking with President Clinton about a number of issues, about economics, about international affairs, about Kosovo and other matters of the moment. I was pleased to have an opportunity to talk with him at Blair House before his meeting with the president, and here is that conversation. Mr. President, thank you for doing this. It's a pleasure to have you on my program.
It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Before we talk about serious issues of statecraft, tell me about your enthusiasm for the World Cup and, and France's victory and what it means to you and what it means to France.
I was very, very, very glad. And I supported the French team day after day. They gave me the number 23.
23.
23. For France, it was a great satisfaction because people were very glad to be the first. Yes. And it had a large impact in public opinion. Just to take an example, the polls of all the politicians increased yes. largely after the World Cup.
Yes. It happened in America, for example, for the mayor of New York after the Mets won the World Series
yes,
back
probably.
In 1969.
Yes. Yes.
There is something about sports and the psyche of a country
yes,
that when they win, it gives them a national pride.
Yes, very enthusiastic. Yes, a national pride. Yes, that's true.
You also seem to me to have a sense of America not seen in many politicians. Is that because of your year you spent in 1953 at Harvard?
Well, not only, of course. I was there when I was a young man, and I was very much impressed by the American way of life, and I did like it very, very much. But this is not the only reason. I came back to the United States very often, and well, I'm very pleased when I am here. I have a lot of friends. I like the way of life, the cooking, everything. Movie, and I'm very happy when I'm here.
You're a good friend of Gregory Peck, the American actor.
Very close friend of Gregory and Veronique Peck and their kids.
When you see the president in a few minutes, after leaving the Blair House to walk across the street to the White House, what do you hope to accomplish with the president?
First, I'll be very glad to meet him because I like him very much for quite a long time. We had a very good human relation. And I also like very much Hillary. And I know that I'm going to see her for a few minutes, and I enjoy it very much.
You can encourage her or not encourage her to run for the Senate.
That's her problem, and an American problem. I don't want to interfere. But I like her very much. She's an exceptional woman. And I'm very glad to meet Bill Clinton. That is not the only reason why we shall meet today. We have quite a lot of problems to discuss about, world problems, financial problems, and also political problems of the world. And, well, this is the reason why.
Let me talk about what's on the edge of everybody's mind, Kosovo. It seems that if nothing comes out of the meetings in France, that you and the president are prepared to attack.
Well, we're going to discuss about that. The situation is very difficult. First, we have to wait till Saturday midday in France to see the result of the discussions. You know, in that kind of discussions, anything can happen at any moment. If it doesn't work, we'll have to see whose responsibility. Is it the responsibility of the Kosovars, who wouldn't accept the substantial autonomy system and want complete independence? Or will it be the responsibility of the Serbs, which wouldn't accept the presence of the ground troops in Kosovo to take care of the agreement? The party who will be responsible of the failure will have to support, to accept all the consequences, including what you say, which means bombing. But we cannot say today what's going to happen, what we have to wait tomorrow. But if it was the Serb responsibility, I think that the contact group would meet immediately and take decisions, including decisions of bombing.
It seems to me that if Milosevic is not prepared to accept troops in Kosovo,
Yes, that's probably
the contact group is prepared to attack, and Saturday is the deadline. So unless he agrees by Saturday, there will probably be military action.
If it is the Serbs' responsibility, you are right, and of course France will be a part of this decision.
In Bosnia,
It will not be the decision of the contact group, because maybe the Russians wouldn't accept. It will be the decision of the 5 members of the NATO in the contact group.
Mr. Yeltsin evidently has said he's opposed to this.
Well, he said that, but all depends on what will happen in Belgrade at the last time.
There is this question in foreign policy. We see it in Iraq. The notion of the mission of NATO. President Clinton has been prepared to attack Iraq even without your support. Is there a redefinition of NATO by the Americans?
I wouldn't say that, first, because we are all working to see what is going to be the NATO in the future. As you know, there is a very important meeting in Washington in a few weeks to discuss about the NATO future. The problem is, does NATO can take any decision by itself, or does it have, or is it necessary for it to have the agreement of the Security Council? That is an important problem which will be discussed in Washington in a few weeks.
An important difference between you and the president?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure. We'll have to discuss, but I am not so sure, because everybody understands that if we give the authorization to NATO to do whatever it wants, in any case and everywhere, it would be very difficult to oppose to another organization which would take a decision which we wouldn't agree. What should we do? Take the organization of the United Africa. They decided a few months ago, to lift the embargo on Libya by themselves, which was not accepted by the United Nations. And we decided that this couldn't be done. That, I mean, we should have an international rule which must be the same for everybody. Well, we have to discuss about that problem, but we are not so far.
Why do you now believe it's necessary to eliminate sanctions and allow Iraq to sell oil?
The problem is to have a new control on the armaments of Iraq, which is no more the case today. And we did propositions, and they are discussed now. And well, the main problem is to avoid a new rearmament of Iraq. And by now we have no control, and that's not a good solution.
UNSCOM is not there, so you have no control.
At all.
But your solution is to have a kind of preventive monitoring to eliminate the possibility of Iraq developing weapons of mass destruction. Yes?
Yes, of course.
Some Americans believe that won't work.
Well,
It didn't work with even UNSCOM's intrusive inspections, so it certainly won't work
well, all depends of,
with monitoring.
yes, and we have to discuss that. But we have not such a difference between the Americans and the French. We want an Iraq without any armaments. That is the main problem. And we are very open to discuss how to do that as well as possible.
Some argue that your government has a commercial interest in this.
No, that's not serious. Honestly, that's not serious. I am responsible for that, and I can tell you that is not true at all.
It's not in the interest of French companies.
No, no.
When you,
It may be that the American companies has more interests than French, and this is not at all a problem for us. I can tell you really.
the reason you want to see sanctions lifted is because you believe they are hurting the children and the people of Iraq.
That is also a reason why.
Yeah.
But the problem is the disarmament of Iraq and the control of that disarmament. Aside, that's true. We should give to the Iraqi people, which is not responsible of that situation, what they need to live. The situation is very bad for them.
But and it will not change unless we eliminate the sanctions. There's no way to change the government in Iraq. There's no way to harbor any ideas of removing Hussein.
If there is a way, let us know and see if it is possible.
Do you see a difference, a change in American policy, so they no longer believe containment is the answer, and the new policy is somehow directed towards the removal of Saddam Hussein?
Well, if it is possible, I would agree. But how to do that? If you have a good idea, you should say that.
I'm sure you'll say that to the president. On the globalization, the world economy, what worries you? Because you have some interesting ideas about the architecture of the world financial system and interesting ideas about currency zones. What's the concern that drives your recommendations?
Financially speaking, we do not have ideas about currencies zones. We did not propose the target zones system. Our German friends did, but not France. We are much closer of the American point of view. We want better cooperation. But that's all.
Just cooperation?
Cooperation. But that's all. I think better cooperation is a necessity, but we cannot go over that. About the globalization, we are worried, that's true. Globalization is a very good thing, which progress comes from globalization. But we are worried about one thing. Globalization provoke exclusion of countries or people who are not able to go as fast as the others, and that is very dangerous. Then we agree completely and we support completely President Clinton when he says, as he did recently, that globalization should be humanized. That's what he said, and we support completely this affirmation.
There some think that there's a need to restrain what they call runaway capitalism. You think that's...
I don't believe that how do you say that?
Runaway capitalism.
Runaway capitalism is a correct approach, a correct thing, because it works for a few people, and a lot of people stay behind, and that is not acceptable, morally acceptable. That's why, as I told you, we should make a code to humanize this globalization, and that is possible. May I take an example? We have seen the problems created by the hedge funds.
Yes.
Well, the situation is now better and different, but, well, this couldn't be possible. You have all over the world places called offshore places, financial places. And this is also not acceptable because it's a way to make very wrong things. Then some rules should be accepted.
Who decides on what the rules are and what kinds of rules?
This is mainly the responsibility of the G7. And we made progresses since 3 or 4 years, but we still have to progress. And that is a point I will discuss with President Clinton to prepare the next G7, which will be in Germany, in Cologne.
Robert Rubin, the American Secretary of the Treasury, I think may be in the meetings you'll have with the President. He has voiced some objection to zones and currency zones and restrictions on currencies.
Volatility.
Because he says it's a question of sovereignty, turning over economic decision-making to someone other than those responsible in the individual countries, and that's not a good idea.
He also thinks that it is very difficult to do it. But I think he's right. As I told you, France never proposed the target zones. We never said that. He repeated the French-German Minister of Finances who proposed that, not us. We always said that we want to discuss about a better cooperation between the countries for a better stability in the world. But no zones system, nothing like that. That's not our point of view. We are close to Mr. Rubin about that.
Back to what worries you. Do you think this financial crisis in the world that went from Asia to Russia to Brazil has been thwarted? Do you think it's been contained? Do you think you have optimism about this last year of this millennium?
Well, it's very difficult to say, but the situation improved in some parts of Asia, as Thailand or Korea. We still are worried for countries like Indonesia, There is Japanese problems, everybody know that. About Brazil, we have to be very careful also. The president of Brazil is a very clever man who does as much as possible, but still there is a danger. Nobody can say what will happen. Russia, it's a very sad situation.
And dangerous.
And, well, it's not as dangerous as other parts of the world because the part of Russia in the international trade and finances is a small part, but it's very dangerous, politically speaking, for Russia, which is a great nation.
And a nuclear power.
And also a nuclear power, which has to be controlled. We should improve the means of the IMF and the World Bank. We avoided the worst because of the action of the IMF, and the World Bank takes a great part to decrease the social consequences of the crisis in many countries, poor countries. And we have to improve their means. That's why France proposed, and I am also going to discuss with Bill Clinton about that, to propose to give more means and more money and more power to the IMF and World Bank. That's why we propose that the
Internet Committee.
Yes, would be composed with the ministers of finances in the world, and the same for the World Bank.
I hear from you, and I read what you have said before you came here, that you feel good about the relationship between France and the United States.
Yes.
These differences are not significant over Iraq, over economics, over globalization.
May I tell you that I'm sure that the relations between the United States and France would be the best as possible if we had no press, no journalists.
Why do you blame us?
I don't blame. I don't blame. I see that very often I found in the press, French or American, articles saying that problems between the United States and France. I can tell you that when I discuss with Bill Clinton, with Madeleine Albright or any American authority, this morning with Mr. Greenspan, I don't feel any problem. Of course, we sometimes have different point of views. It's normal.
Great nations have differences.
Yes, we cannot be aligned on the same, but there is no problem. We've never been angry with each other. That is the truth. The relation is, may I say, very good. And that's true for 200 years. It cannot change like that.
Since Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were in Paris.
Yes.
And Lafayette came to the United States.
And we didn't forget that.
Yes. There is, though, this idea, and you can tell me it's wrong, that some, even in your government, but not you, resent this American domination in the world.
Well, that's maybe true, and it's not only true in France, as you can see.
Yes.
But that's not my point of view. I repeat, when I discussed with the President Clinton, and it was the same when I was Prime Minister and discussing with Ronald Reagan or with George Bush, who were two friends also of mine, I've never been angry. I never went out saying, well, they're wrong, or I'm angry because this or that. No.
But you're not...
We can have some differences in point of views, and that can be discussed, and we always discussed very nicely and without any problem. I never heard any shout in our discussions.
But reflecting some sentiment in your country, that your foreign minister talked about the United States as a hyperpower.
Yes,
there is.
It is a hyperpower. That's not negative. And Madeleine Albright called him after and say in the telephone, "Hello, Hubert, it's Hyper Madeleine." Yes, and well, that was not there was nothing wrong with that.
But
hyper in France is a positive word. We were talking about the World Cup, and we used to say we have an hyper team.
Yes.
Yes.
And you did.
Yes. I'm glad you noticed it.
Well, you know, perhaps the reason there was so much enthusiasm for the World Cup is here was a place where France was number one.
Well, there is some others. There is some others.
But let's speak to that, because there is a natural bond between your country and my country that goes back through the history that you reminded me. But is there some sense that America's dominance, that France has to appear as an alternative, that France has to challenge the American dominance because of its civilization, because of its culture?
I wouldn't speak about challenge, about dominance. Maybe we can say that for reasons of culture, we sometimes have a different approach. The Americans react very often to a situation in the world. In France, we like to think of what will happen 10 years later or 20 years later. That's maybe a difference of culture, but that's not a difficulty.
Do you see globalization as a threat to French culture and all that is so unique about your nation?
I don't think that globalization is a danger for French culture, and I would say for European culture, because there is a French culture, but it's a part of a larger one, European culture. And I don't see why globalization could be a danger.
And the euro, in your judgment, is not a challenge to the dollar.
Yeah, that is also something that I cannot understand. I read in the newspapers, euro wants to challenge, and even sometimes euro is against dollar. That is stupid. That's not at all the reason why we decided to create the euro.
It makes Europe a stronger economic unit.
Yes, of course, and it was a necessity. We, for a very long time, has volatility between our currencies, and this was very bad for our economies. We lost a lot of jobs because of those currencies who moved inside European market for political reasons and not for economic reasons. That's why we wanted to have this unique currency. But we are not in competition with the United States. We're not going to compete with dollar. We are partners, we are not competitors. And euro will be a plus for the stability, the financial stability in the world. And look, the reaction of the responsible people in the United States, including Mr. Greenspan, it was a very positive reaction about the creation of euro. You must understand something, and through you, I want to say that to all journalists, American and French journalists. Europe and the United States, which together represents more than half of the total world production, cannot be competitors. They are partners. And that is a very, well, we can have some different point of views or such detail, but mainly they are together in charge of the future of the world. They cannot compete.
Let me understand one last time, though, as a journalist. There's no need for anyone in France or anywhere else to say, we need to restrain the Americans. They are arrogant, they are dominant, they have too much power, and Europe is becoming a satellite to the United States.
If somebody thinks that, you should have another idea. Make Europe strong enough not to be dominated. And that is a real purpose.
And that's exactly what you, Schroeder, Blair, want to see.
Strong Europe that can work hand in hand with a strong United States.
Then what is the role of France? Is it primarily now simply part of Europe? Or does France, a sovereign nation, have a specific role?
European Union is not the United States of Europe. It's a different concept. It's not the same than the United States. European Union is the Europe of United States, which is different. See if you see what I mean. Then each country in the Union keeps its own identity, its own personality. But the relations are closer and closer. Every year they are closer. And they make one entity, which is, economically speaking, the first one in the world. The first power in the world.
Yes.
And France or Germany or Great Britain will not disappear. They just work together to have, would you say, a synergy?
Yes, synergy is good.
Yes, and work together to be strong together and democratic and pacific together and close to the American Union.
A couple of more questions before we go. Where you will be in office as President of France until the year 2002. President Clinton leaves the year 2000. Do you think we will see a very different world in the next century than we have today?
Yes, probably. Things change very, very, very quickly.
What worries you the most? What worries you the most?
Ce qui vous inquiète le plus?
I'm not worried. That is not my nature. I think things will improve. If you want to know what worries me, it would be the effects of globalization if it is not controlled.
Yeah. And humanized.
And humanized. Because, you see, in our countries, we have more and more prosperity. but we have also more and more poverty. It's true for the people in the countries. It's also true among the countries of the world. The differences for the last 50 years between the rich country in the world and the poor country increased a lot. And if we don't do anything, we shall have a phenomenon of exclusion of people or countries which is not acceptable. Then that is the danger. Globalization has a lot, is unavoidable, and has a lot of good effects on the economy, growth, but we have to be very, very careful with this phenomenon of exclusion of countries or people in the countries.
And the responsibility for that rests with?
The head of state and government.
Individually and together.
Individually and together, of course. And I was so glad when I heard President Clinton saying that, as I told you, about the humanization of globalization. I think that is the main problem of the future.
Humanization.
And he showed once more that he was a great president because he said it first.
During all of his crisis over the last year, you saw him, talked to him on the telephone. Did you ever notice it had any impact on the conduct of foreign policy? While the president was engaged in a distracting scandal over the last year, did you see any impact?
Well, I had, rather close contact with Bill Clinton since he was elected till now. And frankly, I never noticed any impact, any change. He always had the same will to succeed, the same ideas. No, I didn't see any impact.
His political hero is John F. Kennedy. Your political hero is Charles de Gaulle?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because I always agreed with what he did and what he said, and this is the inspiration of my, it's my inspiration.
And his spirit of France lives within you, the sense of French nationalism, the sense of French importance in the world.
General de Gaulle has never been a nationalist. May I remember you that he was the one, when he came back to power in '58, to decide that France will go in the European community. We decided not to go. We were too worried about that. Frilosity. He decided to go. He was the one who said the first, Europe from Atlantic till Ural, which was an image, but which meant a large Europe,
yes,
which is what we are going to do. And he was also the first to say that there was no future for the European countries if there was not a complete union, reasonable and complete union.
So
I still think the same. I don't like people who say General de Gaulle say this or that, but I am a European, and I am also a Gaullist, and I don't see any contradiction.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to have you on this broadcast.
It was a great pleasure.
Thank you. I hope we can do it again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.